Bryan Fogel, welcome virtually to Middleburg and the Middleburg Film Festival. You're joining us from Colorado. I'm glad you are here. Your movie screened tonight on the Jumbotron, our inflatable screening set up outside the Salamander Resort. I'm sorry you're not here, but I think your movie played really well.
That's really wonderful to hear.
I want to ask you a little bit about the making of this movie and about the people and things you needed to get in place before you started work on it. And I want to talk about three different people or constituency. One is Omar Abdulaziz. The second is the country of Turkey, and then Jamal Khashoggi's fiancée, Hatice Cengiz. So different math probably in getting everybody involved and making them feel comfortable about participating. Well, what was your overall message to Omar and Turkey and to Hatice?
Well, being able to come in to this story was quite a journey. I decided literally it was October 16th, 17th, as the Saudis had admitted that Jamal had in fact died inside the consulate, that this felt like, a story that I wanted to see if I could tell. And obviously the variables for me was how was I going to be able to hopefully tell this story that went so far beyond the news pages. And there was Hatice, his fiance. There was a story emerging about Omar Abdulaziz in Canada, and Omar was saying that he had been hacked with Pegasus, that he believed that he was one of the primary reasons why they had murdered Jamal. And then, of course, there was, the Turkish component and all the evidence they held. I found a connection into Hatice. This was literally beginning of November, and we connected through a translator. And at that point, she was, just, just unfathomable to think the loss and grieving that this woman was going through, to think that you're waiting for the man that you're going to marry to come out of a consulate with papers, to realize that not only you're never going to see this person again, but the horrific nature of this crime, and to understand what had happened to him, and suddenly be thrust into this global spotlight where thousands of journalists are coming after you, and not for any of the right reasons. So we connected, and she said, I'm not ready to talk to anyone. And, maybe if you want to try to call me again in, a week or two, I'll talk to you again. So I reached out again, and it was now about November 10th. And she said, hundreds and thousands of people are trying to contact me. But if you want to come to Istanbul, I'll take a meeting with you. And so I came to Istanbul. It was now about November 15th.
This is 2018, right?
And I didn't bring a camera. I didn't bring a crew with me. And we met at a hotel. And at this point, she didn't speak English. She's now fluent in English. And we sat there, and she brought her sisters with her, and a friend of hers to translate. And we cried for hours. And it was one of the most emotional. Every time I talk about it, I really get upset. And I said to her, Hatice, look, I know what you're going through right now, but if you trust me, I promise you, I swear to God that I will respect you, and I will respect Jamal, and I will do everything I can to tell this story and make you proud. And I then stayed in Istanbul for the next 5 weeks, not shooting. And we would meet like every couple days. We'd have coffee, we'd go to lunch, always through translators, and it just kept building trust. And at the same time, I was meeting with all these Turkish officials, these government officials, and saying to the Turks, look, I know that this is a big story, but if you'll help me, if you'll give me this evidence, if you'll let me interview the prosecutor, if you'll let me interview the minister, if you'll let me talk to your people, I promise you, I will not betray you. And so I left Turkey at the end of a year, still not having shot anything. Mm. I then went to Montreal, and the same thing with Omar. But Omar let me start filming with him. But he was not ready to participate. And so the deal that we had is every time I filmed with him, I'd leave him all the camera cards. And so I was shooting, and I had no idea if I was ever going to be able to use this footage.
But it was an act of trust. Here is what I have. You can hold on to it.
Yeah. And so I go back, and now I'm still working with Atija, talking to her. And she says, hey, I'm going to the EU in Brussels. I'm going to be making my very first appearance. And she had never been to Western Europe. She had, Turkey, Oman is where she studied. She wrote a book about Oman, but she had never been in Western Europe, never been, And she said, I'm going to the EU, and I'm going to be speaking in the European Parliament. And if you want to come, you can film with me. And so that scene in the film where we picked her up in the airport and my cameras were there. And then for the next year and a half, the two of us basically became brother and sister. Mm. And there's not a day in my life that I don't text her or I love this person, and I've watched her grow and turn into this force and learn English. And she's so committed to and she's so optimistic now. Like, she's no longer this grieving widow. She is just, resolute in trying to, fight for justice for Jamal. And it's pretty beautiful. And Omar, basically, it was probably 5 months into shooting with him. It was now May or June. We were in Montreal, and he hands me and my crew back this stack of camera cards. It was now like, no exaggeration, $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 worth of camera cards.
This is all of the footage you have.
And he goes, okay, I trust you. And so that was kind of the journey with this. And for so long, I just was going, okay, I want to tell this story, and will these people let me tell this story?
One of the things I think that is important to note is where we are today. And every documentary can, or sometimes has, a coda. And I'm going to read you a very recent Washington Post editorial. The Washington Post presented this film at Middleburg tonight. And this is what the Washington Post wrote in an editorial very recently. And I think it could be the coda to this film. It has been 2 years since Jamal Khashoggi, a renowned Saudi journalist who contributed columns to the Post, was murdered and butchered inside the Saudi consulate in Istanbul. During all that time, two facts have remained unchanged. There has been no justice for those who ordered and orchestrated his killing, and Mohammed bin Salman, Saudi Arabia's crown prince and de facto ruler, has sustained the brutal repression that has made his regime the cruelest and most criminal in the country's modern history. I think what happens in the film explains a little bit of that. But when you read those words and know what has happened, what does it feel like to have exposed the inside story of what happened inside the embassy? And not only has nothing happened, I think there's a G20 meeting in Riyadh coming up that leaders from all over Europe and North America are going to go to.
It's been, I think all of us, and I'm sure the audience in Middleburg tonight, we all have optimism for the world. And we all believe, I think, in our hearts that the right thing will ultimately prevail, that justice will ultimately prevail, that truth will prevail, that the good guys will win. And what I saw in the making of Icarus, where we brought forward, this tremendous scandal of decades of cheating by Russia, and the end result of that is Gregory Rodchenkov, who still lives in hiding, in protection, being hunted by Russia, and where the world has really taken no punishment, or even in the poisoning of Navalny, you know, a couple months ago, everybody's going, well, that was terrible, but nobody's going to do anything about it. And in this story, here to go on this very, very, very personal journey with these people and go, well, everybody says this is a terrible crime and everybody wants to do something about it. You see country after country after country, whether it's Germany, whether it's Britain, whether it's France, of course, the United States, and the countries in the world that could actually do something meaningful. Ultimately, their business interests, selling weapons, the SoftBank, the hedge funds, the money involved is too great to actually stand up for human rights. And here you have thousands of people in Saudi Arabia, in jails, sitting without charges simply for tweeting, simply for saying, I love my country and I think it can be a better place. And here's this, I guess, 33-year-old ruler, by way of being essentially a trillionaire, on November 20th, the 20 richest countries of the world are going to go and kiss his ring to go take his money. And you realize that this is the sad state of affairs. I mean, you know, a month ago, Bob Woodward published his book, and Trump, and he has audio of Trump bragging that he saved MBS's ass.
Direct quote, saved his ass. Not only excused his crimes, but also, quote, saved his ass.
And you go, where are we at in humanity as a people that we're willing to look the other way against crimes of this kind of nature for the almighty dollar? You just got to keep fighting. I'm optimistic, but this has been a real awakening in many ways for me.
Well, let's talk about that awakening, because there's the story of Jamal Khashoggi and how countries reacted to what happened. And then there's a story about this film itself. And I'm going to quote from an interview that was given also to the Post from a senior fellow at the Brookings Institution. He focuses on US relations with his Islamic world. His name is Shadi Hamid. And he said, this was early this year, I don't know what the right word is, censorship or repression or something else, but the basic point holds. A powerful regime that doesn't have the same scruples as others is creating a culture of fear, and companies react with kowtowing. And I'm going to cite a couple of companies that might have bought this film at the Sundance Film Festival. I'm going to start with Amazon and Amazon Prime. And obviously Jeff Bezos is a part of this story. In June of this year, Amazon said it was building an operations network that will span Saudi Arabia with 14 warehouses and a workforce of more than 1,400. Apple, which has a new streaming channel, has a brand new store in Riyadh. Saudi Arabia, and I just looked this up, has an estimated 30.4 million people who are using mobile phones. Its population is 34 million. So 3.7 people, maybe they're infants, do not have mobile phones. And then there's Netflix. And Netflix pulled an episode of Patriot Act with Hassan Minhaj, in which Minhaj accused Saudi Arabia of covering up the killing of Jamal Khashoggi. And Netflix first said it was due to a valid legal challenge from the Saudis. But just a couple of weeks ago, Reed Hastings gave an interview to CNN where he said it was a compromise, that they traded Hassan Minhaj for Saudi Arabia taking Orange is the New Black, Queer Eye, and sex education in exchange. So your movie is caught in what you're talking about, that people are so afraid of Saudi Arabia that an Oscar-winning filmmaker who made Icarus for Netflix doesn't get a chance to show his film on a streaming site so it could be seen around the world.
Yes.
How does that affect you as a filmmaker when you put your heart and soul and all this time and effort into this film, and the very forces that you're chronicling are now surrounding the film itself?
Well, I think to speak positively, Tom Ortenberg and Briarcliff Entertainment and Tom did Spotlight and Crash and Fahrenheit 9/11. He's a fearless distributor, and he saw the potential in this film and said, I believe in this. I want to distribute this film. And so, you know, COVID depending, we are going to be releasing the film December 18th, and Tom has been a champion. We have a wonderful international sales agency in Hanway, and we have an incredible distribution partner in the UK with Altitude, who's worked on wonderful projects, and we're lining up, you know, wonderful global partners. But obviously all of their plans are to release theatrically, and that puts us in a difficult situation. And obviously, you know, competing with streamers and their budgets and their ability to reach an audience of 240 million subscribers and the planet and be in 190 countries is obviously, you know, a hurdle. And certainly I would have preferred a different outcome. And I think that the bigger question that I think we have to ask ourselves, rather than pointing the fingers at these individual companies, which is easy to do, is I'm asking myself as a filmmaker, as someone who wants to keep telling stories like this, who's willing to put his, you know, whatever you want to call it, life on the line to go tell these stories. And you're not getting the support from the platforms and the media that should be standing up and supporting. I think it's, I don't know if scary is the word. I think it's a depressing time to be a filmmaker like myself who wants to keep telling these kind of stories and wants the world to see these stories so there can be change, so there can be something that comes of it. And the story that I'll give you about Icarus, which was so meaningful, was I'd worked with Gregory Rodchenkov. We brought the story to the New York Times. And even all the global press and PR, Russia was still going to the Olympics when Icarus was released in August of 2017. And here was Netflix with this film put on their platform. Overnight, the entire world is able to see this film. Mm-hmm. And it was now off of the pages of the news. It was off the pages of CNN and BBC and a story that Russia had cheated. Instead, this was now a personal story. People fell in love with Rodchenkov. They saw the evidence. They visually were able to connect and bring an emotional connection to that. And 5 months later, the Olympic Committee that was doing everything in their power to whitewash this, to sweep this under the carpet because it wasn't in their business interests to punish Russia, had no choice but to ban Russia from the 2018 Pyeongchang Olympic Games. That is the power that these streaming companies hold. And that is the power that film like this can do. And I am just hopeful and optimistic that this film will find that audience, because I want people to fall in love with Atisha. I want people to know that Jamal was not a terrorist sympathizer, a Muslim Brotherhood, that he was a man who simply was fighting for freedom of speech and human rights and dignity in his country and the country that he loved. And he was willing to leave that country and go into self-exile and leave his family, all for that purpose. And so I am hopeful that these companies will reverse their opinion, or their you know, I don't know what the word is, and look at, okay, there's business, and business is business, but then there's a higher power. And I think we as a society have to answer that higher power, because all the money in the world doesn't change something if you're not trying to do good on this planet.
I want to ask you about two radically different audiences, but maybe they share some common ground here. And one is going to find this film by hook or by crook, and those are people in Saudi Arabia. They're obviously very sophisticated about social media and mobile phones, and they could probably have VPNs. And the film probably will never be commercially exhibited there, but they're going to find it. And then about an hour's drive from here is the nation's capital. So between Washington, D.C. and people in Saudi Arabia, are there different things that you hope they take away from the film? And where do those ideas and those takeaways overlap?
Well, I think the one thing that I saw in making this film, especially when I went with Hatice to Washington, and she wanted to go to Washington, and 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 I said, okay, let's, let me see what we can do. And she came to Washington, and we helped her to try to meet the people that she wanted to meet. And she spoke in front of the Human Rights Subcommittee in DC. And what we saw was an outpouring of love, bipartisan on both sides of the aisle. And there was a very specific choice that I made editorially, in that the three people that I chose to basically admonish the current administration was Lindsey Graham, was Rand Paul, was Bob Corker, basically showing that this is bipartisan. This is not the right versus the left. This is not the Republicans versus the Democrats. This is bipartisan support and an administration which is going against the will of Congress and the American people and people that want to do something about this. And so on October 2nd, Joe Biden actually released a statement offering condolences for Jamal Khashoggi. And in his statement on the second anniversary of his murder said, if I'm elected, I promise that I will reassess our relationship with Saudi Arabia, and I will work for justice on Jamal. I'm paraphrasing. Mm-hmm. And so I believe that there is really an appetite among Congress, what I mean, the House and the Senate, on both sides of the aisle, to have accountability and fight for justice. And so there is some optimism here. And I say to the audience in Washington, I think, as upsetting as this film can be, I think it also can be really empowering, because it's ultimately up to us to call our leaders to task, and leaders around the world to demand change, and to not forget this murder, because this murder isn't about Jamal. It's about journalism. It's about freedom of press. This is not just a Saudi Arabia issue. This is, and why I wanted to take on this story, because if you can go do this to a Washington Post journalist, who's next? Who can you not do this to? And how, and where are we heading as a people?
And what about the people in Saudi Arabia? I think it'd be crazy to expect anything equivalent to, an Arab Spring uprising, and we know how that ultimately turned out. But what are the conversations, even at the risk of imprisonment and worse, that you hope people quietly, discreetly, probably already are having, but continue to have inside the country?
I had in the beginning phases of making this film, the very first outreach I ever did was to the Washington Post. And it was literally, in the days following Saudi Arabia's admission. And the Post was very gracious, and they said, look, if you want to come and meet with us in Washington, we'll gladly sit down and talk to you and help you however we can. And I sat in a room with Fred Ryan and Marty Barron and Shane Harris and David Ignatius and the people that knew Jamal. And in one of the early conversations I had, I won't tell you who, is a Washington Post journalist who had spent a lot of time in Saudi Arabia. And he went there right after the murder of Jamal, basically to test the temperature of the climate. And he said, everybody I talked to, most of them didn't realize that this had happened. They thought he was a terrorist, Muslim Brotherhood, because of what was being pushed forward in the media. And if I asked anybody to say anything negative or their opinion on MBS or anything like that, it was just people would silence, they wouldn't comment. There is such a climate of fear, extreme fear, because what you're seeing is literally sending out a tweet is enough to put you in jail. Or in the case of Omar, his brothers, 2 years in, are sitting in a jail for doing nothing other. I mean, these are kids, other than that they happen to be Omar's brother. and his friends are sitting in jails simply because they know him and they're using them as, as bait. So, I think that it has to be a groundswell, and that is what we saw with the Arab Spring, although a lot of it got quashed and reversed. We saw how Twitter and social media had this power to bring people together, and that is exactly what the kingdom is scared of. They saw what happened in the Arab Spring. They saw the power of social media, so that is why they're working so hard to control that. But I think, I think this film will ultimately find its way. I think tens of thousands of Saudis will see it, and hopefully if enough people do something, then you can have change. And I don't think it's about overthrowing the kingdom or removing MBS, which is unrealistic. I think it's about enlightenment, understanding that you can be a kind monarch, that you can have love in your country without repression, and that by being a magnanimous monarch or human being, that the people can love you rather than be in fear of you. And perhaps that might be that might happen down the line. I believe that humanity has a ability to evolve.
I want to ask you about a couple other things. One is about the nature of whistleblowers. You have characters in both your first films, Icarus and The Dissident. Gregory Chenkov in the first film, Omar Abdulaziz in this film, and I'm going to mention the whistleblower in the United States about Ukraine. These are people who are fearful for their life, and certainly in the Ukraine have been called traitors. Whistleblowers used to serve a very different role. They were held up as heroes. They were truth tellers. They were important to journalists, and they were important to conversations about things that were of importance to national security. Daniel Ellsberg. And now they're treated very differently. And I think in your two films, you've seen not only the importance of whistleblowers, but also the risks they face for telling the truth.
It's there's that idea, and I think in Icarus we latched on to the Orwellian world of 1984, where Winston Smith has this great optimism that he can change the system. Then he also ultimately realizes that Big Brother is going to win,
right,
and he will not be, prevalent, and that ultimately there is no truth. And we latched onto that in the story of Icarus, because that was truly and is Gregory's reality, that here this guy brings this evidence forward, fights for truth, albeit that he was, complicit in his actions for quite some time, but that he will never be free, that the truth, in fact, doesn't set you free. It means that you live in isolation, in an apartment, under security, under protection, with a target on your back for the rest of your life. And obviously we see the same thing in The Dissident, where Omar is under protection of Canada. He checks in with Canadian intelligence every day. And there were many times where we were there to film with him. And literally we have a crew and we're going to go shoot with him, and he doesn't show up, and we hear from him 2 hours later, and he's like, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Canada received a threat today. They're telling me that I can't go out, and they're protecting me. And, I need to talk to, intelligence, and I'll be in touch. And we would just sit on the ground in Montreal for 3-4 days or a week, and wait till the threat had been cleared and assessed, and he was able to work with us again. I mean, this is real. There was a story, months ago, of how the Saudis sent the same kill team into Canada to go kill an American who's Saudi, and they were going to, come through the Canadian border. So what we're seeing is, this global hunt, and part of it, I think, has to do with there is no punishment. What we learned in 2006, when Putin poisoned Alexander Litvinenko, was that you can do these things and get away with it. that ultimately, as upset as the British were and the US intelligence, they went, okay, what are we going to go do? We're going to go invade Russia? Are we going to go stop business with them? Are we going to, right? And ultimately they said, okay, you did this. Shame on you. Move on. And what Putin learned from that was that these actions will be tolerated. And he's now left his fingerprints on all sorts of actions. And I think if you follow that playbook to MBS and other, autocratic dictatorships, or even what we're seeing in the current administration, is that we're seeing that you can operate with impunity. And ultimately, there is no punishment, and the punishment is for the whistleblower. Right. It's not for the guy who committed the crime. It's for the guy who actually comes forward and has the bravery to put his life on the line to expose the crime. And I don't know how to. It's strange times.
I'm going to end on an optimistic note. I'm going to talk about angels who let filmmakers and allow them to get their stories told. We're in Middleburg as guests of Sheila Johnson, who not only started this festival, but built this incredible resort. And Sheila has always been committed to letting people tell stories that are important. I'm going to ask you about the Human Rights Foundation and how important they were to getting this film made, and how you see organizations like the Human Rights Foundation playing a role in making sure that these kinds of stories continue to be told.
You would think that that it might be easy to get your films financed, and having come through Icarus, that it'd be like, oh, you can go do what you want. And it's not really the case. There's always the financial element and who's going to support you. And as I embarked on this journey, I was connected to Thor Halvorsen, who's president of the Human Rights Foundation. And I sat with Thor, and he said, we got your back. What do you need? And he went out to his donors, many of them anonymous, and they have supported this film. They've continued to support it. They've helped raise money behind P&A so that we can release the film and advertise the film, market the film. And there is good in this world. There is people and foundations that are seeking justice, and in this case, the Human Rights Foundation has been my angel. But I don't think it's me personally. I think it's Hatice's angel, it's Omar's angel, it's Jamal's angel, and it's people who want to tell stories like this and don't care about the financial outcome. If this had to be a financial equation, whether or not this film was going to make money, this wouldn't have happened. This came through basically gifts and angels that wanted this story to be told, and are continuing to this day, this day, to keep trying to give this film wings.
And your first movie, you took on Vladimir Putin. This movie, you take on Mohammed bin Salman. Maybe a romantic comedy will be your next movie, just to not have too many enemies in the world, or are you got to do what you got to do?
I'm always asked this question of, aren't you fearful? Aren't you scared? Aren't you? And I don't know what's wrong with my mind. I think when I saw Free Solo, when I saw Alex Honnold, there was a strange connection. I felt like, maybe I have that strange receptor in my brain that doesn't process fear. But I don't know. Like I get overtaken by these stories, and I think that I'm not alone. I mean, I believe in the good of humanity, and I believe that Hatice, how can you not want to help this person? And this story is bigger than an individual. It's bigger than me. And so I just kind of focus on the bigger picture, and go, hey, maybe I have a chance to make an impact. Maybe I have a chance to do some good, and maybe I have a chance to help this woman. And Hatice, I think what's made it so worthwhile for me is over the last year and a half, I get messages from her constantly. We were in Zurich for the Zurich Film Festival a week and a half ago. They had in-person screenings, and she came from Istanbul, and we met in Zurich. And I was feeling down, and she sent me these messages after the festival, and she said, "I love you, Bryan. You're a good man. I'm so proud of you. I'm so proud of you. You've helped me so much. I love you. You've helped me so much. I couldn't have done this without you." And when I get messages like that, I don't know, it makes me feel like all these things are worth it. And and I want to keep telling stories like this. And hopefully these media companies are going to, you know, start thinking about the bigger picture rather than the economics.
I'm going to share one personal story. I've been bike riding with Bryan, and about a year ago, we were on a ride in Malibu. We're coming down Canyon Dune Road very, very fast. I looked at my speedometer. We were going 45 miles an hour. And I said, not safe. I got to hit the brakes. And you and a bunch of other guys took off at 50 plus, weaving through traffic. And that's who makes you the filmmaker you are. You will go 50 plus through traffic. I hit the brakes, but thank goodness you go full speed ahead. Bryan, thank you so much for sharing your time with us. Thank you for sharing your film with us.
My pleasure.
Let's hope the conversations around The Dissident continue to flourish. And thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Middleburg. I'm grateful. And you know, if you saw the film tonight and feel like you know, go on to HRF humanrightsfoundation.org and you know, there's things that you can do. Sign letters to your congressmen, to your senators, you know, and say, hey, why are you going to the G20? Why are you supporting this? And I think that there is a message of hope behind this, and I hope that you know, there is a positive outcome that can come from the loss of Jamal, because I think a lot of people view him as the last martyr of the Arab Spring, and certainly in his death, as tragic as it is, I think there's a lot of light that's been shined too, and I'm optimistic that it can that, you know, that there'll be positive movement. So I'm honored that you guys are showing my film, and thank you, John. Thanks, Middleburg.
Thank you, Bryan. Have a good rest of your evening. It is late here. Thank you for, you didn't stay up quite as late as we are. We're on the East Coast, but thank you again for joining us, and good luck with you and your film. Thank you so much, Bryan.
My honor and my pleasure. Thank you. Good night. Bye.